Hello there, you're watching the Press Preview. Our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Over the next half an hour, we're going to be seeing what's making the headlines with the writer and social justice campaigner Dalia Gebrial and the Mail on Sunday commentator Dan Hodges. So welcome to both of you. So let's take a look then at what's on those front pages. And the front of the Financial Times carries a story about pressure mounting on Theresa May over her position on Brexit as she faced demands from both main parties to stay in a customs union. The Mirror is leading with MP's decision to bring in a new opt-out system for organ donation named Max's Law. Also leading with that is The Eye, reporting that MPs from all parties joined forces to support the new opt-out law. Parts of Britain are about to turn colder than the North Pole, sparking a fresh raft of government warnings. That's on the front of the Daily Express. Jeremy Corbyn has questions to answer over his contact with a communist spy, a former head of MI6 says. That's according to The Telegraph. The Times is leading with a 2-year legal battle it fought with a billionaire friend of President Putin, who's now lost the blanket anonymity that has shrouded his activities in the British courts. Over half of all audited meat plants in the UK have been found to have at least one major breach in the last 3 years, and that's on the front of The Guardian. The Sun leads with Stephen Fry, saying that doctors carrying out routine tests during his annual flu jab discovered he had prostate cancer and subsequently saved his life. While The Star reports that presenting duo Ant and Dec narrowly avoided death while rehearsing a dangerous stunt for the return of their Saturday night takeaway show. So plenty to get our teeth into there with Dalia and Dan. And we're kicking off with the front page of the Financial Times and the issue over the customs union. It appears that harmony has broken out at Chequers over the government's position on the issue. We're not entirely clear of all the detail of it, but already people have got a lot to say about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a bit of a case of out of the sort of Brexit frying pan and into the Brexit fire for Theresa May. So we had the summit, which was the Great Make and Break summit down at Chequers. I think the general consensus is it went well for Theresa May, that she secured a degree of agreement amongst the cabinet, certainly sufficient agreement to go forward. But then, just as she thought, if you like, she was out of the woods with that, suddenly her own rebel backbenchers jump up, and not in this instance what we would call the normal suspects, the sort of the hardcore Brexiteers, but in this instance the hardcore Remainers, who it seems are about to enter into an unholy alliance with Jeremy Corbyn and table an amendment that would effectively bind the government and bind Theresa May into remaining part of the customs union. And frankly, that is a position that is simply not something that Theresa May can't countenance. From the very outset of Brexit, she said we couldn't stay in the customs union. The reason for that is that if we did, that would prevent Britain from negotiating or attempting to negotiate individual trade deals with other nation states. And it is very much a red line for the Brexiteers and, in fact, a red line for Theresa May. Now, the word this evening is, at the moment, that the rebels have enough votes to defeat her. Now, whether that will be the case in a couple of months' time when we actually get to the vote, we'll obviously have to wait and see.
Because over the next few weeks, we'll get the whips putting a lot of pressure on and doing potential deals.
Exactly. The whips will be putting pressure on Theresa May as a number of speeches and other events that she thinks will change the nature of the conversation. But at the moment, it is a very real and present threat to both Theresa May and to the government. And
presumably that would be a threat to her authority if that did get blocked, because if she's saying this is the kind of Brexit I want and she can't get it through her own parliament, that's going to undermine her authority, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that calling this victory for Theresa May is speaking way too soon. I think it's more that just in light of the past sort of 6 months, this seems like a slight, thing for her to hang on to as something that isn't quite, in a sort of 6 months of complete chaos, this feels like a bit of a break. But fundamentally, we know that this is very likely to be rejected by the EU. In many ways, this idea that we can, it was described as cherry picking, that we can't have this kind of Brexit or single market a la carte. And unfortunately, in these negotiations, the EU have the power. And so, yes, this is uniting her party very briefly, but we're seeing not only, these strategic manoeuvres by Corbyn and not only, conflict within her own party. That's before we even get to the point where we're bringing it to the EU, where it's very likely to be rejected. So, I understand that the Brexit vote was very much because people felt very disconnected from their, political decision-making, from the political decision-making in this country. But it seems like at the moment, we are more, in terms of sovereignty, on the back foot than we've been in a very long time.
Well, and clearly the government would say, well, we haven't gone through those negotiations yet, and they will feel optimistic that they can get the frictionless trade they want without being in a customs union. And meanwhile, Labour is shifting its position, we think, on this issue of a customs union as well, aren't they?
Yeah, it looks almost certain now that, Jeremy Corbyn's giving a speech on Monday in which he's expected to sign Labour up. There's a slight nuance. We're not entirely sure whether he will sign Labour up to the customs union or a customs union. As ever with Brexit, the devil is in the detail. But certainly he is seeking now to outflank Theresa May on the issue. And I think, actually, you make a very good point. I think there's a lot of focus on what sort of Brexit Labour wants, obviously what sort of Brexit the Cabinet want. We're now having a discussion about what sort of Brexit Theresa May's backbenchers want. But I was speaking to a Cabinet Minister today who was saying, the thing we've got to remember is, as you say, what Brexit do the European Union actually want to give us at the end of this process? And that is obviously going to be another hurdle for Theresa May to overcome.
And do you have any sympathy for both parties? They're both trying to please factions in both their parties that are divided. They have very different views. Yeah,
it's obviously a very difficult position for both parties, but I would say that the divisions in the Tory party are far deeper. They go back a long time historically. So this is really a test of Theresa May. She's been very tested for the past 6 months, so I'm sure she's tired of being tested. But, and as far as I'm concerned, we're getting a much more coherent message out of Labour in the sense that we're seeing a lot more unity, we're seeing more strategic manoeuvres. Theresa May is just, this is just one kind of lucky break as far as I can see in a very long and torturous process.
Well, I think we've got speeches on Monday and Friday, Labour and then the Tories, so we might feel differently at the end of the week. Who knows? Let's turn our attention to the front of the Daily Telegraph, shall we? Because you've picked up the story of Jeremy Corbyn and this issue of the Czech spy it's reared its head again in the Telegraph.
And it's the story that just won't go away, despite, well, I was going to say, despite the best efforts of Jeremy Corbyn and some of his more vocal supporters to try and force it off the news headlines. But here again we have Richard Dearlove, the former MI6 chief, asking a question that I've actually been asking this week, and which actually for me goes to the heart of this, which is this assertion by Jeremy Corbyn that he did not know when he met this diplomat. It never seemed to occur to him that in the midst of the Cold War, this Eastern European diplomat could possibly have been anything other than a bona fide diplomat, and that he could have had any sort of connections with Eastern European intelligence services. And this is the thing about this I don't understand from Jeremy Corbyn. Had he said at the start of this, yeah, OK, I met this guy, but we met lots of guys, yeah, I had my suspicions about what he may have been up to, but it was the Cold War, used his line about I was interested in trying to see how we could broker an agreement across the Cold War divide. That would probably be the end of the story in 24 hours. And the refusal, because as far as I'm aware, Jeremy Corbyn still hasn't actually come out and specifically answered any of the detailed questions about the nature of his relationship. Despite all the stuff about smears and it's all terrible and the press are out to get us and, we're going to get you back in return, I still don't understand why Jeremy Corbyn didn't just shut this down straight away by just answering some very simple questions.
Well, he has said that he remembers meeting one Czech official and discussed peace and disarmament, and he says that a lot of these, he calls them smears, as you say, he says these allegations are absurd. What's your view on this?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, the only people that have any questions to answer are the journalists that allowed this to go past the, the editors that allowed us to go past the editorial board. Journalism 101, you have to verify, you have to fact check, you have to triangulate stories, especially such inflammatory stories such as this one. And under the most basic scrutiny, we can see that this story has absolutely no legs. We've had this demand for him to hand over his Stasi file, and then we find out that the Berlin archive says that this file doesn't even exist. And ultimately, this is just a distraction, I think, from the fact that Corbyn is having a really strong impact in the grassroots. I don't know if you've ever been to a Momentum meeting, but I went to one a few months ago.
I'm not a regular attender, I've got to be honest.
But I really think that you should go and have a look, because I think it would be so opposite.
Are you inviting me?
Well, I think it would be such an opposite experience to what you think. What you see there is a room packed of people from all age backgrounds, from all kinds of cultural backgrounds, doing politics at the ground. And ultimately, people are scared of this. I think that, a lot of the talking heads on Twitter don't want to acknowledge that maybe they aren't the ones that know everything about, where the political landscape is going. And they're, diverting to these completely legless stories that Corbyn was a communist
OK,
spy.
very quick word on that, because we ought to go to a break.
Yeah, I mean, if I turned up at a Momentum meeting, I wouldn't be fearful I was going to be, surrounded by lots of Eastern European spies. But the reality is, the basis for this was an Eastern European file, which did show Jeremy Corbyn, who wants to be the next Prime Minister of this... no, not
and that
the
doesn't
meetings
stand
weren't.
Up to normal journalistic verification.
Jeremy Corbyn, who does want to be the next Prime Minister of this country, did have these contacts. And all people simply said is, can you simply answer some basic questions about what the nature of your relationship was? And to date, Jeremy Corbyn has still failed to do that.
I think he's been absolutely crystal clear that this story is a completely fabricated, legless story.
OK. And we will now go to a break. But lots more to talk about after the break, including just call him Vincent van Troff. We'll introduce you to the pig whose artwork is fetching thousands. It's true. Or is it? I don't know. We'll find out.
Or fake news.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me tonight, Dalia Gebrial and Dan Hodges, and we're going to turn our attention to a double-page spread inside the Times, which focuses on the university strikes, and they're suggesting there in the headline that strikes have been plotted for some time.
Well, so basically what's happening is that universities are trying to cut academics' pensions by 40%. So this would cost about £10,000 a year. Academics would be worse off once they retire. And this is also the longest strike in UCU, which is the lecturer and professors union. It's the longest strike in the UCU's history. It's going to be 14 days. And, as we can see in the photograph here, students are overwhelmingly supportive of their lecturers, because they know that education is not about, overpaid vice-chancellors. It's not about, investing huge amounts of money into new buildings to become like real estate tycoons, essentially, which is where a lot of university resources are going into. But it's about well-resourced teaching. It's about teachers that are paid adequately from when they become a postdoc onwards. And what we're seeing is a chipping away of the security of academia as a job. A YouGov poll found that 61% of students support their lecturers and only 2% blame the staff. We actually saw a much higher rate of blaming the employers and the university management for the fact that a lot of students now are going to be missing their lectures for the next couple of weeks.
Because that's the other side of it, isn't it? That students may support the cause, but at the same time, they may well be missing out. They're paying quite a lot for their tuition, and if they don't get all that tuition, it seems like quite a tough deal for them.
Yes, and also there is the issue of, whilst the students may support their lecturers and obviously the lecturers support themselves, I'm not entirely sure whether this is a dispute which is going to catch the public's imagination and get wider public support. I mean, obviously the main thrust of the Times investigation here is that this is a strike that has been basically 7 years in the planning by a group of as portrayed by the Times, sort of rather radical university lecturers. I mean, I have to say, I think the idea that one of the lecturers is someone who fights the badger cull is not necessarily the most evidence of the greatest radicalisation, or maybe his reported quote that a generation will dance on Maggie's grave may be of more concern for people. But I've got to be honest. I mean, you know, I used to work for a union. I'm not going to immediately come out and dismiss out-of-hand industrial action, but I have to say I don't think, sort of in a time of austerity, academics are necessarily going to be the top of the public's list in terms of additional public resources, but I could be wrong.
OK, let's crack on and move inside the Sun. There's, it's very small, but there is a story there about, there we go, a Corbyn rival, they call him, who has gone from his position.
Yeah, I mean, it's described as a Corbyn rival for shorthand there. This is a breaking story this evening, which is that Ian McNicol, who is the General Secretary of the Labour Party, you know, well known for being somewhat of a, not necessarily the most dyed-in-the-wool Corbynite, has, depending on reports, resigned, but in reality been ousted from his position as this sort of ongoing, as it were, cull of moderates within the Labour Party continues. And, you know, this is just a continuing example of the pattern that we're seeing, that since the general election, you know, Jeremy Corbyn has taken control of Labour's ruling executive. We had these amazing scenes over the weekend where an election for Labour's National Policy Forum was blocked, and now we've seen the Corbynites exerting their muscle again, and it's that, you know, they're trampling the moderates underfoot.
Is that how you would see it?
Well, I think it's really easy, and, you know, people are already using this as an example of, you know, scaremongering about commies that go bump in the night and, you know, trying to spark the Red Scare Mark II.
I think it's Ian McNicol that's gone bump. That's
well, you know, we don't know why he resigned, but what we do know is that there was a lot of dissatisfaction amongst the membership, which has grown a huge amount under Corbyn, with the fact that he used Labour Party resources to take people who are trying to join the Labour Party to court, and actually looked over his own purge within the party. But what I would like the people at home to take from this,
quite quickly if you can, got an important story about pigs to move on to.
is that I would love to see the next General Secretary elected. It would be part of this wave of democratisation in the Labour Party that, for many people, Ian McNicol represented, you know, a force that tried to curb that democratisation. So really, I think that, you know, we can't speculate about whether he was ousted or whether he resigned out of his own will, but what we do know is this is a chance for a fresh start for the Labour Party.
OK, and we will move on. We did promise we'd talk about this pig story, so we have to bang on about it. But here we go. We've got 30 seconds to talk about Picasso, as they call him there.
Or a new Francis Bacon.
Yeah,
wonderful.
It's actually an incredible. So this pig clearly has made better life choices than me. It has sold a painting for $25,000, and my favourite part of it is that apparently she has one painting entitled Brexit. Now remember that pigs can't actually discern colour, so I'm not quite sure how she's managing this. It's even more impressive. But she has one piece entitled Brexit, which has an approximation of the word in the colours of the British flag. So I wonder if she's trying to send us a message, you know, about how to go about.
Well, she's got a 21-year-old owner who seems to have much more common sense than the people buying these paintings. In my view.
Who owns these paintings?
We must leave it there. But on that inspiring note, Daria and Dan, lovely to see you back again at 11:30. Hello there, you're watching the Press Preview. Our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Over the next half an hour or so, we're going to be talking about what's making the headlines with the writer and social justice campaigner Dalia Gebrial and the Mail on Sunday commentator Dan Hodges. So hello to both of you. So let's see then what's on the front pages. And the Financial Times leads on pressure mounting on Theresa May over her position on Brexit as she faced demands from both main parties to stay in a customs union. The Daily Mirror is leading with MP's decision to bring in a new opt-out system for organ donation named Max's Law. Also leading with that story is The Eye, reporting that MPs from all parties joined forces to support the new opt-out law. Parts of Britain are about to turn colder than the North Pole, sparking a fresh raft of government warnings. That's on the front of the Daily Express. Jeremy Corbyn has questions to answer over his contact with a communist spy, a former head of MI6 says. That's according to the Daily Telegraph. The Times is leading with a 2-year legal battle it fought with a billionaire friend of President Putin, who's now lost the blanket anonymity that has shrouded his activities in the British courts. Over half of all audited meat plants in the UK have been found to have at least one major breach in the last 3 years. That's on the front of The Guardian. The Sun leads with Stephen Fry saying that doctors carrying out routine tests during his annual flu jab discovered he had prostate cancer and subsequently saved his life. While the Star reports that presenting duo Ant and Dec narrowly avoided death while rehearsing a dangerous stunt for the return of their Saturday night takeaway show. So lots of different stories there on the front of tomorrow's papers to discuss with Dalia and Dan. And in fact, you're turning to an inside spread to kick off with tonight. This is Donald Trump talking again in the aftermath of the Florida school shooting about what he thinks needs to be done over the US gun culture. And the Times article here focuses on the students who disagree with him.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is, as ever, we talk about so many of these, but this is an appalling story. I think on a number of levels, obviously because of the appalling loss of life that has again taken place. Here you can see, and that's an excellent headline about how the students in America are now, as it were, starting to take this issue into their own hands and saying, look, we're not going to put up with this anymore, and good at them, and good luck to them with that. But the most appalling thing is just having been through this is we now have a situation where Donald Trump has come out and the President of the United States has said openly that he believes the solution to children being killed in American classrooms is to put more guns into those classrooms by arming the teachers. And when you get to the stage in what is such a serious debate as that, where you are having an argument put forward by the President of the United States of such stupidity that it defies comprehension, I mean, basically, we've just crossed the line. And if that is the view of, the national head of state of the United States about how to deal with this problem, then God help every child in America, because as I say, it's the most stupid thing I think I've ever heard in my life.
And he made a big speech on a lot of subjects to this big Conservative conference today. And one of the arguments when talking about arming trained teachers was that there was a deputy who was armed, who didn't try to approach the gunman. I think during that speech he called him a coward, I think. And he said that teachers would be different because they would know the pupils in their classes, they would care about them, they were more likely to act in the case of a shooting.
I think, and as you've mentioned, it's another day, it's another mass shooting in America. It's absolutely devastating. And fundamentally, the American public don't agree with these kind of solutions that Donald Trump is putting forward, as much as,
Some of his supporters might.
Some of them do, but there's a very broad consensus that, for example, things like assault rifles should be banned, things like bumper stocks, things like silencers. The only reason that things like, weapons that are able to cause such vast damage and especially get into the hands of the wrong people is because there is a very powerful lobby. The NRA is able to drown out voices of others, of the majority, with their money. But what I want to say is that, don't sleep on these students. Students in America have led some of the most successful and incredible rights movements in the country's history. And I think, this marks this particular incident out as different because we're seeing the students taking it into their own hands and becoming activists. And you can't argue with them. They've been on the front line of the consequences of an out-of-control lobby that's operating in the US.
Is it just an issue of a very strong lobby, as you say, or is this... A lot of British people might find it hard to get their head around this passion that a lot of people in America feel about the Second Amendment. They see it as their freedom and their right, don't they, to bear arms. And there are still a lot of people that feel upset at the thought of that being compromised in any way.
Yeah, they do. But I mean, I want to say to these people in America, look, we're not coming. The redcoats aren't coming anymore. You just don't need this stuff. I mean, there are obviously practical examples with the number of guns that are in circulation. But it's the failure to address any sort of rational attempt to reduce the guns. And as I said, when you've now got a situation where the President of the United States is arguing that the solution is more guns in the classrooms, and as we've seen, guns not in the hands of trained security professionals, but in the hands of teachers, again, when you reach that stage in the debate, what help is there of getting any sort of solution?
And do you have some sense of optimism as well that students might make a difference? Might their voices be heard and move the debate on?
I'd like to think so, and you're absolutely right. I mean, about the nature of campaigns that have taken place in the past, I have to say I'm very, very pessimistic about this issue because of the way that the NRA and the sort of gun money is inexplicably linked to the American political system. And I think the stupidity of Donald Trump's comments, underline that.
OK, let's move on to the next story that you've picked, which is the front page of tomorrow's Daily Mirror. And this is a campaign that they have been fighting for some time. It also makes the front of the Eye as well. But there's the Mirror. It's Max's Law. So explain what this is all about. And this lovely picture of Max Johnson, the 10-year-old on the front page there.
Yeah, so up until now, we've had a system whereby if you want to donate your organs after you pass away, you have to opt in. And a lot of studies found that the number of people that were opting in was not actually representative of the number of people that were willing to donate their organs after they died. A lot more people were willing to, if you asked them, than had actually officially opted in.
But just hadn't got round to it? Or...
Yeah, they hadn't got round to it. It hadn't occurred to them. It's kind of one of those things that, when you've got the busyness of everyday life, it kind of goes to the back of your mind. So by moving to this opt-out system, we will see a drastic increase in the number of organs that are available, and these save lives. I've been an organ donor since I was, I think, 12 years old, since you could sign up. But one thing I want to know is that I knew that before, the families of people could actually revoke the consent given by you. So I'm not sure if that's been changed, because that was quite troubling to me. But this is definitely, I think it's impossible to disagree with, really. And
Theresa May promised this young boy that it would be called Max's Law if it did get passed, and he received a heart. He was the recipient of a donated heart, and he's talked very movingly about what it's meant to him. And the family of the little girl who died, whose heart was donated, have also said it's given what might have been a meaningless death some kind of meaning, the fact that this little boy has benefited.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we obviously went from the sort of horrific story before to what is one of the most uplifting stories in the papers today, and you're absolutely right about all that. The thing I would also say is obviously we've had, shall we say, some criticism of the press this week, but this does actually show this is a campaign the Mirror's been running for several years now, and good on them, and they've got a result there, and also good on the MPs who have pushed for this as well. You talked about Theresa May. Geoffrey Robinson's there, who I know is a bit of a Labour veteran who's been pushing on this for years as well. And it's a fantastic result. And tying into what you were just saying before, it does show that if you do put some commitment behind these things, you can enact positive change, and that's 200 lives a year saved and 200 families that are going to feel, the ultimate benefit from this. And
I'm sure a huge number of people will agree with you. Are there going to be some people, though, that are uncomfortable with it, that feel that it's going to be very distressing for any relatives who have a loved one die, and then this process has to go into action quite quickly when they may not have been aware of it?
Yeah, I think it's always obviously incredibly emotional and incredibly distressing, but in a sense, this kind of takes the decision out of their hands, as far as I can see, that it's kind of which is why I find it very strange that families have the power to revoke that, because really, yes, it will be distressing to families perhaps, but it will also, as you mentioned, give hope and joy to so many families of the people whose lives it's going to save.
And the message would be, if you feel strongly about it, you can opt out of that system.
Yeah, of course. So it's not enforced.
OK, let's move on to a story you spotted inside The Sun. This is page 2 of The Sun, and an article there about Claire Short. So what's she saying? Former International Development Secretary.
Yeah, well, it's two linked articles, and as you can see there, one in which Claire Short refers to the Oxfam scandal as hysteria. You can see the quote there in which she has the caveat, there's no excuse for what I presume for what was the activities that were taking place, but then says it's a crazy, crazy, hysterical, distorted story. But then below that, you've got more than 20 charities, including Oxfam, have pledged to boost safeguarding and are urging people to report unacceptable behaviour. Now, I've got to be honest, I have seen some people who are supporters of the overseas aid lobby. I've got to say, I'm somebody who supports overseas aid myself. I'm not somebody who signs up to the concept that we should be cutting back on it. But I have seen some people trying to say this story is about trying to smear the aid lobby and put forward some excuse for cutting aid. It isn't. This story arose because an absolutely appalling and disgraceful abuse that had been covered up for years was exposed. Oxfam are not the victim in this. They've been the corporate perpetrators of appalling abuses and have rightly been found out. And I have to say, I can't for the life of me understand what Claire Short thinks she's talking about there.
And we don't have the full context of what she says there. I mean, is she trying to make the point? It's difficult to read between the lines that it is important that aid still goes on and that the good work that charities do is preserved?
Well, I think what she's arguing here is that they were wrong to have used prostitutes, but 11% of all British men have done so. So I think what she's doing is she's conflating sort of sex work with using the very vulnerable situation of just after a disaster has happened and being in that very powerful situation of, victims of this disaster and you being, this kind of wealthy, person from the global north coming in with this, huge organisational backing behind. That power imbalance makes us very different to a typical kind of, use of sex work, which is what she kind of is trying to conflate it with. But I think, as you kind of mentioned, this idea that Oxfam is the victim of this, the problem it's not just bad apples. The problem isn't just that some individuals did this. The problem is that there was systemic cover-up, which we're finding in all institutions, in so many institutions of sexual violence, sexual harassment being covered up. And NGOs, even though they might do some good work, are not exempt from this at all. And I think it's really important to not allow the halo around some NGOs to, be a cover for, what is going on in these highly vulnerable areas. For
transparency and proper investigation. OK, we're going to take a break. Coming up, lots to talk about, including why Stephen Fry's cancer disclosure could open up the discussion about men's health. And we'll try and do that in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview tonight with Dalia Gebrial and Dan Hodges. And you found a story inside the Times about the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Yes, this is going to, I can confidently predict, turn into one of those rows about the clergy intervening in politics. But Justin Welby has apparently written a book in which he's attacked the dysfunctional housing market, attacked people who buy second and third homes and investments, and has attacked NIMBYism. Now, as ever, I'm sure there will be a number of people who welcome the Archbishop's intervention and will be lauding his attack on the iniquities of the British housing market. I would equally possibly point out that as Archbishop of Canterbury, he's head of an organisation that probably has one of the largest property portfolios in the country, and that maybe has indulged a little bit of NIMBYism itself on occasion. So it'd be interesting to see to what extent his intervention is welcomed.
Well, yes. I mean, should he, in his position, wade into issues like this, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think everyone, has the right to express their opinion. I don't believe that, just because you're in one position in the public eye that you don't have a right to give your opinion on something. But I do agree, really, that, we are, particularly in the big cities, particularly somewhere like London, the housing market is in a complete mess. And this is because not only because of second homes, but also because we see a lot of overseas investors and, the kind of wealthy transnational elite just buying up homes that they have no intention to live in, just to store their assets. And, this is pushing people out from communities that they've lived in for decades, particularly in South London, where I live and where I grew up. Communities and shops and places that have been there since I was, a child are being forced out by skyrocketing rent prices. So, I think that he's using his position to highlight a really important question in the housing market today.
I mean, but also there's a quote here, so again, so he also says the right to buy scheme launched by Margaret Thatcher contributed to a very rapid increase in home ownership in Britain. Now, I don't know if Justin Welby owns his own home. I mean, obviously he will have he will occupy.
One comes with a job.
He occupies quite a nice home, as you say, that comes with the job. So again, I'm not entirely sure he's the person best placed to lecture on this.
OK, but you think it just starts a debate, so why not? OK,
absolutely.
let's move on to the front of the Financial Times. Not their main story, which focuses on more Brexiteering, but the KFC story, which, of course, we've seen a fair amount in the last few days. What are they highlighting here?
Yeah, so I think firstly, the thing that really just got me laughing was just how pathetic we are. You know, KFC shuts for one day and people are calling the police, people are outraged that they have to go to Burger King now. I think everyone needs to calm down. But, you know, I do think that this is a good, this is the social justice part of me coming out, but this is a good time to kind of raise that the whole meat industry in this country is entirely unsustainable. And I'm surprised that it's taken this long for some kind of crisis like this to happen.
Well, it's certainly unsustainable if it continues to manage its affairs the way KFC have been doing it. I mean, I cannot for the life of me understand how, I mean, as they say there, in fairness, they're admitting it, how if you are sort of Kentucky Fried Chicken, I would have thought you would have realised, or someone would have realised, that chicken was quite a significant part of your business offer. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it also does reflect on a slightly strange mentality and amongst the elements of the British public. I mean, we had the police having to tweet, please do not, as you say, please do not phone us because your local KFC is closed. So I think a little bit of perspective all round would not.
And a lot of fun to be had on Twitter, saying you had one job.
Twitter is great at moments like this.
Well, that is very true. OK, let's move on finally to... This is page 7 of the Express. I think Stephen Fry also finds himself on one of the front pages as well, but this is inside the Express, and him revealing that he's been treated for prostate cancer. Yes, and actually this is another story which actually certainly seems to have had a happy ending. I mean, I'm not sure if it's covered in that story, but there's a number of stories about this. And I think it was the case that he went, was it for his flu jab?
Yeah,
he
went for his flu
jab, and just as part of that, they uncovered these symptoms. And he was treated, and he has been cured. And one of the things it again has emphasised, which is an issue that has been raised over the last few months, is for the first time prostate cancer amongst men cases of prostate cancer amongst men have now overtaken breast cancer amongst women. So it does show that this is an issue that men have to take very seriously as well as women. And often without symptoms as well. And it's one case, I mean, celebrity culture gets a lot of criticism, doesn't it? But this is where it can really do some good, because people might step up and listen and think, I need to get a test.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of these things, mammograms, smear tests, prostate examinations, these are all uncomfortable, horrible things that we always put to the back of our minds. But really, catching these kind of symptoms at a really early stage can save your life. So it's I'm really glad to see his platform being used to remind people. And I was watching yesterday Tessa Giles' daughter talking about how we also need to really increase the access to global cancer treatments by everyday people as well. So that's also an angle of the conversation.
Yeah, and good that it was a good outcome for Stephen Fry, of course.
Yeah.
Dalia and Dan, very good to see you both. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.